And welcome to the Midday Show. I'm Jeff Everett. He is Mark Messina. We're back for another Monday edition. I'm sure everybody was watching football this weekend. We're going to recap and I don't know if we're going to preview the Super Bowl yet, but we're going to recap what happened beforehand. Great news for Mark and for other singles in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the place to be, apparently. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then something I've been kind of chirping in your ear about, the whole Spotify misinformation COVID thing. I want to dive into it. We've talked about COVID in a lot of different ways. To me, this is just another angle or another way to kind of talk about what's going on in society and what's happening as kind of COVID is still floating around us. So I want to talk about that as well. Before we get to all of that, I know nothing about your weekend. I know nothing about how you are feeling. So this will be interesting. Mark, how are you feeling today?
Well, you mentioned, the story that we're going to get into about, Pennsylvania is for lovers. And I feel like I've got the mood lighting going on over here because with my new computer, it keeps adjusting. And I'll turn on another light and it'll get brighter and then it dims it back down. So I don't know. There has to be some sort of control button that I do not know where it is.
We should probably clarify, Pennsylvania is for singles, which is very different than the Virginia slogan.
Yeah, I mean, married people are miserable wherever they're at. The single people of Pennsylvania, you'll be surprised to hear that Pennsylvania ranks high.
I have some theories on this too. I read over it. I saw what they use to actually calculate what makes a good state for being single.
I'm curious to hear that too.
Yeah, but the more I thought about this, I think it kind of makes sense. I think Pennsylvania is kind of designed for singles. I have a kind of a theory.
When you started with this stat that you found, and you're like, Pennsylvania is, and I thought it was going to be something embarrassing, like we rank 48th in something. And when you said, no, Pennsylvania's top 5 for single people.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, my ears perked up. I'm ready. I'm ready. Screw Joe Rogan, screw football. Let's get down to the meat and potatoes.
All right, we can start off with that then. So there was a study done by Wallet Hub. Yes, and what they did, they took the time and they basically, it's kind of like a whole Valentine's Day promotional.
Who's the polling place? I'm losing it.
The polling place?
Who always does the Gallup polls? It's not quite a Gallup poll.
No, listen, everyone has their own research. So they did a study. They used 3 key dimensions. They did dating economics, which I think is important, right? So how much is a date going to cost you? How much is a date expecting? Like dating economics, right? Because one of your big things is don't go to like this big fancy dinner or whatever. Go get an ice cream cone and talk.
I have a funny story about that. Yes.
Okay, so that's the first one they did, and then we'll go back to your story. Dating opportunities, meaning how many other singles are there? How often are people going out? Are people tucked inside? Are they outdoors? All those different types of things go into dating opportunities. And then the last part is community, romance, and fun. Meaning, what is the environment? What's the normal community in Pennsylvania like? Is it outdoor barbecue, dancing, or is it like, boring?
Okay.
So those were the 5 things those were the 3 key dimensions in deciding which state was the best and which state was the worst. In Pennsylvania, 5 out of 50.
What do you have the other ones? Do you know who we're competing with?
I do. I have the top 5. Would you like to hear?
I would like to hear the top 5. I want to know.
Okay. So the top 5, number 4 was Texas.
Makes sense.
Yep. Number 3 was Florida.
Okay.
And then 2 and 1 should not be surprising.
Vegas.
New York.
Okay. And California.
Now, this is what I will say. I think the top 4, there's so many people, and the opportunity to meet new people just pumped them up 1, 2, 3, 4. It didn't even matter what other metrics you used. The amount of people you're going to meet in those 4 states made it the top 4. So to me, in a weird way, I almost feel like Pennsylvania had to kick butt in the other 5, or I'm sorry, the other 2 metrics.
Pennsylvania is way more populous than you think.
Because of Philly and Pittsburgh.
And Philly's big. Pittsburgh's not all that big. But Philly is way bigger than you think. And when you think of other states, like I was just going by population. Those are the 4 most populous states.
Okay.
Correct? New York, California, Texas, and Florida, I think, are the 4 most populous.
Yeah.
Next, like how big? Because Detroit's big, Chicago's obviously big. We've got to be one of the top 7 or 8 in population anyway. So that's something I hadn't really thought of.
Okay. But see, I've never considered Pennsylvania in that top 4. I've always seen those 4 on like their own little.
No, I agree.
And then you have.
We don't associate like Texas and Pennsylvania.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And then I've always seen like your Illinois, your New Jersey, your Pennsylvania. Like I've always seen them as kind of like on the outskirts, kind of like looking in.
No, I remember, and you were a teacher, and I was a teacher you were just a little longer than me, but neither of us did it very long. But I was teaching high school math outside of Baltimore, and it was a very mixed school, but there were some kids with some money, and the one kid, this nice dorky little kid, was going out on a first date with a girl that was in the class.
Okay.
So he's telling me all the things that they're going to do on this date.
Okay.
And where they're going to dinner and how they're getting there and all this stuff. And it's not his money. It's his parents' money.
Sure.
But he has racked up a bill. And the girl's sitting there, and he's proud. He's so proud of himself. He's probably 16 years old. And he gets done. And I would say, order pizza and rent a movie.
Sure.
And she goes, yeah, that sounds good. And he was like crestfallen.
Yeah.
And I was like, listen, dude, you do all that. She comes back. Was it because of you or because you dropped $400 on her and you have to drop $400? If you get a pizza and rent a movie and she doesn't like it, then you don't like her anyway. Sure. So that's my theory. Ice cream, pizza, something that everybody likes, and then simple.
Worst place if you're single?
Alaska.
No.
I'm thinking now. My mind just wandered as to why not. Maybe no one's single in Alaska because you need the body heat, so they're just made it.
Maybe it's easier to find somebody because everyone's so cold. Like they're just desperate.
Yes.
Possibly.
Well, here's my theory. Going opposite of what you just said, it would be population. So Wyoming.
Wyoming is in the bottom 5, but they are not last.
Because Wyoming is the least populous state. If you didn't know that.
Yes, Wyoming's 46.
Alaska actually has more people than Wyoming. So something like those, Montana, Minnesota.
Minnesota, Montana.
Actually, Minnesota's a bigger state than you would think.
Oh, Minnesota.
Population-wise.
I've heard really good things about Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I've heard Minneapolis is awesome.
Except it's cold.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I bet you it's beautiful during the summer.
It is.
Yes. Here's Wyoming at 46, North Dakota at 48. The last 2 are surprising. Arkansas is 49. I don't know if I would have thought that. And then this one's not surprising, but obviously there's stereotypes that play into it. West Virginia is number 50.
We'll let that one alone.
Okay. Yeah, we can leave that one right there.
I'm with you. If you didn't laugh when you heard that answer, I don't know. You just weren't paying attention.
Here's my thing with Pennsylvania. I think we're, especially for like the younger crowd, is it not number 1 in the country in higher education?
There are a lot of schools.
I could be wrong. I think Pennsylvania has the most colleges and universities in the country by state.
It might. And my theory on this is New Jersey barely has any. And New Jersey has a lot of people crammed into that little state. Sure. And they're going somewhere. So, you get down into Maryland, like University of Towson, or is it Towson University, whatever town. Like half the schools from New Jersey. You go to LICO or Susquehanna or any of these private schools around.
Right.
And it seems like half the schools from New Jersey.
Yeah.
So it doesn't shock me. And, you get people from New York State and stuff. And there's so many of the private schools. We think of the PSAC, which is such a profound Division IIs. But there's so many private schools like Cumming.
Yeah.
And Susquehanna that whether you're in state or out of state doesn't matter.
Sure.
So it's just the same. It's all grant and need and aid based and stuff like that. So yeah, that doesn't. If Pennsylvania is not, well, look at the whole PSAC. There can't be that many states that have a state school system that elaborate.
Sure.
And still have Penn State University and all the branch campuses and all the bajillion kids that go there.
Well, even College Ave in Philadelphia. I mean, it's unbelievable how many schools are down there. So I think when Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, you throw in the higher education system, people coming in, they never leave. They're from out of state. They're saying it makes a ton of sense to me. I would argue that it might be even better than the top 4 for singles if you really started to think about it.
Well, let's look at you.
Yeah.
You've been seeing a lot, and you just go girl to girl. They just keep showing up.
I don't know about girl to girl,
They
but
just keep showing up, man.
I certainly found out who I was and what I was looking for. Let's put it that way. Is that a fair way to put it?
And some of them found out who you were and what they weren't looking for.
And what they weren't looking for, which is very, very true as well. I have no issue with that.
It's not you, it's me.
I don't think I ever did that.
Did they ever do it to you?
Oh, probably. I mean, I'd have to go back and think about it. I mean, I'm getting older now. It's funny. I was thinking about this when I was dating my girlfriend in college. It's so weird to think of it this way. It was 15 years ago, which I know for you or anybody else, it's like, but for me, the idea that like my first real long-term relationship was 15 years ago is like, I can't even wrap my head around.
This is the one that hit me the other day. I saw this on the internet, and I love the internet except for things like this, and then I hated it. When you come to grips with the fact, and I was born in 1971, when you come to grips with the fact that today is as close to 1970 as 1970 was to 1918, that hurt.
Yeah,
that hurt bad.
I've seen those ones before.
I don't know if I'll ever recover from that one.
Someone helped us out. Top 4 states are Texas, California, New York, and Pennsylvania for higher education.
Oh yeah, California has to have 1 billion schools. Okay. They have to.
Just because of population, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when you think of all the there are a lot of little schools in California that we've never heard of.
There must be, because in Pennsylvania, it is absurd how many private and religious institutions there are in higher education.
I think there are those in California.
Okay. All right. That would make sense then.
Not that I know, but I think.
No, that would make sense. I want to talk about the Spotify thing and Joe Rogan. I don't know if you got to see the video. Joe Rogan did like a handheld 8-minute, and he kind of talked about, I'm going to read some of this so I have his exact quotes correct. But essentially what happened was Spotify and Joe Rogan apologized, not necessarily to Neil Young, but essentially like apologized for the fact that he felt like he had to do that.
Yeah, if you don't, just to backtrack for 10 seconds, Neil Young from Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, said he was sick of the misinformation that Joe Rogan was spreading about COVID and all the other stuff. And if Joe Rogan was staying on Spotify, then Neil Young wanted his stuff pulled, and they pulled it. So there you go.
I have 2 things that have really bothered me about this. The first one was, as we got closer and closer to the weekend and throughout the weekend, it became more and more apparent that not only was Neil Young's music going to be off of the platform, but there were going to be other artists that came along with Neil Young. The headlines for this stuff made it sound as if Spotify ripped down Neil Young's music. So a lot of the headlines, Spotify takes down the music. Neil Young asked for his music. I would argue Spotify complied. Spotify.
Yeah, but you're smart enough to know that headline doesn't get clicks.
Doesn't. But that drove me insane. Because this was not like they kicked Neil Young to the curb. This was Neil Young saying, like, if we can't come to an agreement here, I'm gone. And they couldn't come to an agreement. And Spotify did what he wished they would do. That is the story. No, I'm with you. That's what happened.
It's like a kid saying, Coach, I'm tired, take me out of the game. So you're like, okay. And then it's like, the coach benched him.
Yes.
No, we didn't bench him. He wanted to come out.
Correct.
So, okay.
So that's my first issue. My second issue with this, the whole concept of COVID misinformation. And I don't even think this is necessarily like a Joe Rogan or a Spotify debate. If you look through media right now, there is a double standard of what is COVID misinformation. And I understand that there are specialists, there are scientists, there are data-driven studies that should be the reliable source for this information. I'm not disputing that, but we act as if things that are being said now, everybody else had correct before or everybody else had wrong before, and that's just not true. And so what I mean by this is, you have Spotify and Joe Rogan. Spotify's this monster platform. They give out all this stuff, and you can listen to all these different people talk about things. And some of them are fantastic. and they have to apologize for something that they're not entirely sure was misinformation or is misinformation. The people Joe Rogan has on his podcast are doctors. Like, they are scientists. Like, these are not people who are not accredited with the proper paperwork or, college institution degree that merits that their opinion might mean something, whether you agree with it or not. When I think back, and Rogan hinted at this in his apology, there are things that the CDC, there are things that the World Health Organization, there are things that our federal government said and got wrong in the last 8, 10, 12 months. And they are not going to apologize for it. And that's fine. If they don't want to apologize, that's okay. But this idea, this double standard then, that like he can't have a conversation on a podcast or Spotify can't have freedom of speech on their platform because people feel like it's misinformation. Like, if you think they're giving misinformation, don't go back and look at what the CDC was saying 10 months ago. Like, don't go back and look at what your federal government was telling you 18 months ago, because then like you would basically say they should be off of the platform. Like, they shouldn't be allowed to have free speech either. So there's this double standard right now with COVID misinformation that I really, really, really disagree with. It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Here's my stance on it. I don't, there's a lot of what you said that I agree with. I think there's also, for all these platforms, one of the issues with society is because we're still so new into the social media technology podcast age that most of us grew up believing that what we saw or read was fact-checked or we take it to be true. Now you get a guy like Joe Rogan or anyone, us, we could come on here and just spout.
Sure. I mean, I would argue.
And we do. But there's a belief, there's also an understanding that the way these things work, that we'll just take Joe Rogan, is Joe Rogan's number one agenda to provide intelligent content, or is Joe Rogan's number one agenda to make money for Joe Rogan? And I know this because I have a buddy who back a couple years ago said, you know what we should do? We should make a fake news site because they make money. And they're out there. So if Joe Rogan sits there and says, I'm trying to do what's better for society, and I'm trying to point out and bring people that that give different viewpoints, then that's great. But is Joe Rogan coming out and saying, this is what's going to get me the most ratings? The most ratings is going to get me the most advertisers, and I'm going to make more money. So, and that's the aspect that only Joe Rogan knows. And again, as you say, well, he has doctors on who are accredited. Well, what is the doctor's agenda? Is the doctor's agenda to provide information, or is the doctor trying to make a name for himself? Because the bigger the name they make for themselves, then they get a book deal, then they get speaking fees, and everyone from this can have a financial agenda. So like, I think Neil Young is saying, it's like when you take an old-fashioned newspaper and they take something off the AP wire and they run it in their newspaper that none of their writers wrote. They just took it off the wire. But it is expected. They believe that the AP is providing news that is checked and believable, because when they put it in their paper, they are now responsible for it. And what Neil Young is saying, that Spotify should have a responsibility to make sure that this stuff that's out there is for the sake of information and not for agendas of people that are just trying to make money.
Which is weird, though, because that's literally every music artist on Spotify.
But every
music artist on Spotify's agenda is to make money through Spotify.
But that's through entertainment. They're not trying to do it by spending.
Yes, and Joe Rogan is entertainment. My issue is still around the word of misinformation.
That's fair. I'll give you that.
If I'm a professional or I'm a creditor, whatever it may be, and I know the answer. Like, if I know the answer and I give the wrong answer, that is misinformation. But these topical conversations that he's having, he's literally digging for what, why do they think this? Why would they want to say this? And like, he challenges a lot of the people on his podcast of like, what makes you like if you ever watch a Joe Rogan podcast, you should have to take a drink every time he says, what makes you think that? Because all he's trying to do is figure out like, why are they saying this? What are you doing? He's just digging for their truth and what is making them tick. So the point I'm making is within a topical conversation, like the thousands that you and I have had, or the thousands that Joe Rogan has had on his podcast, the idea that you're going to define something as misinformation when you yourself are seeking the answers, how can you give misinformation when you yourself don't have the answers?
Valid point. Question. Because what's funny is my 15-year-old son loves Joe Rogan. I never watch. I only see Joe Rogan on fight night.
Yeah.
Has he brought in people during this who are very pro-vaccine?
Yeah.
Does he have both sides?
So he's brought in both sides. And one of the things that he said in this video is he should do a better job of scheduling his guests closer together when they are of opposing sides. So a lot of times when he schedules guests, he'll have someone come on that promotes purple, and then the person who would promote green doesn't come on for another 3 weeks or so. Okay. And at that point, you've lost the debate, you've lost the lingering. But he has people on from all different aspects of life on both sides of the aisle, pro, anti. I mean, it is incredible who he allows to come onto his show. And a lot of it is because in his mind, he is not the news. He is a topical conversationalist. Yes. And
the conduit, if you would.
And he has in past interviews, he didn't say this in his apology, but in past interviews and different times that he's talked to people, he has said, I don't view myself necessarily as a journalist or as somebody that's promoting the news, but I do see myself as somebody more autobiographical of like, I want to know why this person thinks what they think.
Right.
It doesn't mean I agree. It doesn't mean I disagree. But how did this person? And he's had Kanye West on. He had the who was the big right wing news guy who started his own thing, kind of out there. I can't think of his name now, but he was on the show as well. If I said his name, you would be like, yes. But anyway, and one of his biggest idols growing up was Howard Stern. He, in his early shows, he raved about Howard Stern, and it was part of the reason he started the podcast, was to be able to just say what he wanted to say and do what he wanted to do. So the idea that this is news or it's published and it's this content where they have the answers and it's real information, it makes no sense to me.
Well, I think, too, one of the issues in the world when we grew up, not everyone had a voice. Mm-hmm. And I remember I learned this when I first got into talk radio, when talk radio kind of became out, not just sports, but on all kinds of talk.
Right.
And it gave a voice to everyone. And one of the things that I learned doing sports talk radio is lots of the voices from everyone you don't want to hear because they're not very bright.
Yeah.
And so that's why as we got later and I came here and I was doing a radio show with Chris Massey, I was like, we don't want callers. Mm-hmm. We only got an hour. You and I can handle it because some callers are great, but a lot of the callers have no idea what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And now with social media, one of the dangers of it is that there are people that have no idea what they're talking about. But again, we're trained to, when you read it, or if it looks well written, then it's a fact. And I know I might have told this story before. I have a Facebook friend who shared a meme or whatever, and just in reading it, it was statistics about something.
Sure.
And in just reading it, I was like, there's no way that's true. So I did a 15-second Google search. I came up that it was blatantly false. And I contacted her. And I said, hey, do you know the post that you just shared is not true? And I'll never forget her response. She goes, yeah, I was wondering if it was true. But just think, what if it was?
Right.
And I remember her saying this. I was like, what do you mean, what if it was? That's like us coming on here and saying aliens just landed in Beaver Stadium.
Right.
And someone said, that's not true. We're like, well, it might not be, but what if it was?
Sure.
Like you can do what if it was with anything. And because, again, your generation and below will be better because they've grown up in a society where just because they read it doesn't mean they believe it. My generation is struggling with this because if we read it in print and it looks like it's real, we just naturally believe that it was fact checked and it's true.
So I'll end it with this because I'm curious what your answer would be to this as well. I believe COVID is real. I have all 3 of my shots. Most of the mandates I followed as far as masking and things like that, However, I have certainly shown fatigue in the last 8 months. With all of that being said, I would argue that there are a lot of governments, organizations that have put out actual misinformation compared to what has been put out on the Joe Rogan podcast, because they acted as if they had the answers and they didn't.
Correct. And we've talked about that. And we have said before, we wish that they would just come out and say, we don't really know, but we think this is the best way.
Yes. Because there is, if I'm Neil Young, you are probably played across conservative radios all across the country. You're probably played across liberal, and those news stations, those radio stations have promoted CDC statements. They have read off news from our government. They have promoted actual misinformation of things that our government and our global organizations deem to be true, that we then found out 6, 8, 10 months later, it wasn't. Well, and so does he want his music off the... to me, it's such a narrow aspect of pinpointing this one thing and acting like they had the answers and they gave this information. When you look at just everything around you, we didn't have the answers. We did the best we could. And I would argue the same way the CDC or whoever else did the best they could, but they didn't have all the answers. It's the same thing with this. Did he have all the answers? No. But the difference is, I would argue, he didn't act like he had the answers.
Well, and I would say too, that there's also the other side when you're talking about people making money. And we talked about the first day it came out, Neil Young's going to make money off this.
Probably not.
He just got his name back out there. And there are a lot of people that are digging up Neil Young music.
Maybe. I feel like those people were already digging it up.
But it's reminded, the old saying, any press is good press. And Neil Young just got a lot of press that he wasn't getting any other way. Now, again, he's old, he's rich, or rich enough, whatever. It was probably purely philanthropic. Sure. But at the end of the day, he's like, this isn't going to hurt me business-wise either. So, that's something. And I would also say that back to the Rogan or the Howard Stern, or there was someone else. Oh, we've talked before about Bill Maher, how Bill Maher is very left, but Bill Maher will have right-leaning guests on, and Bill Maher will make fun of the left just as much as he makes fun of the right. And I just saw an episode of his, and he said people are coming up to me and saying, you're making fun of the left more than you ever have. Yeah. And he said they've never given me as much material as they are right now. Sure. And there's a place in our society for people that are so big that they can say whatever they want, and they're not totally influenced by one side or the other. So there is a place for the Bill Mahers and the Joe Rogans who are going to come on and say he doesn't care. Like, Joe Rogan has his money. He doesn't care what Spotify says. Now he needs Spotify and all that. I'm not going to say he's not going to tell Spotify to go pound sand, but he's not going to do a show probably tomorrow based on what am I going to do to get ratings, because he has the ratings. He doesn't need them.
No, I don't. I guess I don't think there's any ill intent on Rogan's part.
I don't think so either.
I really don't. And so again, it just comes for Neil Young, it's like, what did this one? I just don't know the connection, because if I'm Neil Young, I'm looking around and I'm going well, they kind of got it wrong, and they kind of got it wrong, and they got it wrong. And yet this is the thing that you're fixated on. You know what I'm saying? This is what I've decided. It just doesn't make a ton of sense.
And we will also agree that, there are so many things with agendas. There are so many entities with agendas through this. Mm-hmm. And, just as we know, what businesses got shut down and what businesses were left open and why and all. It's unless you believe that everyone is totally altruistic, then when you start picking, well, they had an agenda there, and we're not naive enough to know that everyone's not altruistic and people had agendas. So it is a very tangled web that has been woven, and it is a fascinating story. And it almost shows, say the maturity or the adulthood of Joe Rogan not to just come out and give Neil Young a double middle finger and say I can say what he wants. That he gives his explanation. Yeah. He's like, listen, I'm not trying to cause problems. Yeah. I'm trying, and it's working.
And he told a good story. His last day, he had a job when he was a kid, doing security for some amphitheater. And his last day ever was a Neil Young concert. There was like a fight or dispute. He threw a hoodie on, walked off the job, never collected his check. His last day ever was a Neil Young concert. And he tells this story, and you can tell like there's no
animosity.
There's none at all. It's just kind of like, I have this show. I was interested in this thing, and we talked about it. And I don't know.
Well, doesn't he give you
a ton of sense?
And again, the people who watch his podcast or listen to his podcast know him better than I do. And I'm not going to say you know him, but you still get a feel for the guy. Yeah. I know him from MMA commentating. But just that, like, I don't want to say comfortable in his own skin, but like, this is what I was trying to do. And I'm sorry. Like, if you don't get me, you don't get me. No. Well, and just like Howard Stern was like, Howard Stern knew, like, listen, there are people that are going to hate my guts.
Right.
But they're not my audience.
One of the unique things about Rogan, and I think you kind of missed this because you didn't know, when he started this, there was no money involved. This was him on YouTube with a microphone and a camera. It was a hobby and a passion project. 100.
It
was a chance for him to just sit down and talk to the people that he was interested in and that he liked. And I remember watching those early shows. There were no advertisements. There was nothing. It was just him. And it just kind of became something bigger because of people like myself. Like, oh, this is great. Like he talks about things that he doesn't have a side, and we're just talking, and it is what it is, and he'll have anybody on the show, and it was very Stern-esque, like it was. Like, and so I don't know, this idea now that he's held to this standard of just, but again, I mean, that's what fame and popularity and money, I guess you get held to a higher standard, and it is what it is. But anybody who actually listens to him, like and you don't even have to listen every show, but anybody who has consistently listened to him from the beginning to now, Rogan is not the issue. He's not.
Oh, I would agree with that.
This is much further and deeper than the individual person of Joe.
Well, it's funny. Did you ever see the movie Private Parts about Howard Stern?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the funny thing about Stern is that when he shows up, and he was just a kid, and, he's just obnoxious and arrogant and stupid and bad jokes and blah, 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 and sex talk and all this stuff, until they realize that he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And it took like the mainstream for him to establish and keep getting established and keep listening. And you know what? The guy's a very, very bright guy.
Sure.
And he went about it differently is not the right word, but he went about it more crass, I guess, but it doesn't make him any less. He's the smartest guy in the room in a lot of rooms that he's in.
Sure.
But
see, it's funny because I think Rogan, if you really listen to him, part of Rogan's brilliance is he knows he's not the smartest.
He's just an every guy.
Yes. And that is part of the brilliance. And he will bring people onto the show. And sometimes when the conversation starts, he does get overpowered intellectually so what happens is you have people who have strong opinions or they have strong thoughts, and they almost commandeer the show at times because Rogan's kind of fascinated and he's interested. And I think that's where people kind of like, well, why would he let them say that? Or why doesn't he push back? And I'm like, because he knows that like, he's not the star of this show.
They know what they're talking about.
Like there's a reason that they're on the show, and it's not that he agrees with them. It's that he wants to hear what they have to say because it's interesting, and he wants to know what makes them tick and how they get there. I'm telling you, it makes no sense.
No, I get it. And to think, and if that's what we're like, that he is the everyman that gets the other people on and just asks the questions and can step aside. Right. What made Howard Stern told the jokes that everyone laughed at, but nobody had the guts to say.
Sure.
And that's what made Stern brilliant.
Yeah.
And I had somebody in the movie world with screenwriting. I'll never forget this. I was talking to a producer lady who was in her 50s. And she's asking about a script and my movie that ended up getting made. And I said, it's kind of a raunchy comedy. I said, do you like raunchy comedy? And I will never forget, because I was nervous asking this because it was a 50-some-year-old lady. And she said, Mark, everyone likes raunchy comedy. Yeah. And I'll never forget it. And she's wrong. Not everyone does, but like 90%. There's that Puritan base that doesn't. Those are the things. And there's a brilliance. Yeah, so there's a need for people like Joe Rogan in society, but I respect, Neil Young's and it just with all of this, you just never know what's really in their mind. And does the other thing, like we talked about last week, does Neil Young, does he really blame Spotify, Or is he just trying to bring attention to this like Alyssa Milano did with the Me Too movement, and then it takes off? Because maybe Spotify does need to say, hey, listen, maybe Joe Rogan's not a problem, but we just can't. We have more responsibility to this than just throw anybody out there that's going to get us ratings.
I think what it's done is it's brought a question to the forefront that probably is well overdue, is how do we define misinformation? Because that's like the hot word right now. It's misinformation. It's COVID misinformation. But again, if you're having a topical conversation and you're seeking, and it's what makes you tick, why do you think that? That's not misinformation.
No,
those are somebody's
You're
thoughts.
gathering information.
There's somebody's thoughts, and that doesn't. So how you take that at face value is on you.
Well,
now, if the CDC or somebody comes out and they give information and it's wrong, that's misinformation.
If they knowingly give wrong information.
And so to me, what people really need to start asking themselves right now is, what is the actual definition of misinformation?
Well, but don't you think, like, one of the things that shocked me in adulthood is how many people, if you say just something like, well, this is what we're going to do. Tonight we are at basketball. We're not going to press. We're just going to play half court. And someone will say, well, that's just wrong. Like there's a right and a wrong answer. And in so many aspects of life, it's just an opinion.
Right.
Like, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to take 3rd Street instead of, and people just sit there and like their way is right and the other ways are wrong. And especially when it's maybe non-conventional.
Sure.
Like if you're like, hey, I'm going to eat dinner at midnight, and then I'm going to sleep till, and I'm going to eat breakfast at 1 p.m. And there'd be a whole generation of people like, well, that's just wrong. Sure. You can't eat and go, but it's just different. And that's one of the other aspects where people are like, well, that information is wrong. Well, there's so little right and wrong, and there's so much opinion and speculation, and people get that, great. Like, I thought the Bengals had a chance to win yesterday, and people thought I was wrong.
There's also an aspect too, like we've lost, and I don't want to go down like this huge cycle. However, it is okay to be wrong. It's okay.
It's okay to disagree.
It's okay to disagree, and sometimes like it's okay to be wrong initially. Like as long as you're still willing to like, oh, you know what, I got that wrong.
Right.
Then it's okay. Like, I don't know. I don't know if we know what misinformation actually is. I think the majority of people have never asked themselves internally, what is misinformation and what does it mean and what does it look like? I think they just use the word and it encompasses everything. And then all these things fall into it that when you really sit down and think about it, it's not actually misinformation. Because do I actually believe they had the answer? And if the answer is no, then how could it possibly be misinformation? They didn't have the answer to begin with.
Don't you think there's a level of people, no matter ranging widely in intelligence, but there's a simplicity to people that they believe what they believe, and anything different than what they believe is misinformation.
Yeah, and that's my point. Because it just helps them encompass it,
yes,
and it just makes their life neat, and they can put a bow on it, and that stuff's over there.
Yes.
But there's a difference. There's a huge difference.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Real quick before we go, do you have anything on football this week?
Let's talk about football tomorrow.
You want to talk about football?
Yeah, we've
tomorrow?
been here a lot. We got 2 weeks.
We can do that. I don't know if you we can do that later. I do want to say someone stepped in for you when you were gone. My cousin Cliff, it's his birthday. He did a show with us when you were gone. I think.
I've taken my daughter back to school.
So happy birthday to Cliff.
How old is he?
There you go.
Should we sing?
Question. 30.
Should we sing? Happy birthday.
37, maybe 38.
Is his middle name Clavin?
No, it's James, which is the same as mine.
It should be Cliff Clavin. Do you know who Cliff Clavin is?
I don't.
Oh, he's from Cheers. God, you're young. God, you are young.
See, that sounds like misinformation.
Cliff Clavin.
I've never heard that before.
His real name's like John Ratzenberger or something. And he was in Toy Story. He has become one of the famous voice actors.
Okay.
I want to say he was the pig in Toy Story.
Okay.
But he was Cliff the mailman on Cheers. But he is gone. When you're like, what's ever happened to him?
He's in like every Pixar movie. He does a voice in.
He is a voice actor.
He had the mustache. I know exactly who you're talking about now.
Yes.
Okay.
Cliffy and Norm.
Once you said Cheers, I was like, I know exactly who you're talking about.
You're lying, but that's okay. That is misinformation. Jeff is knowingly lying.
He did or didn't have a mustache? Is that what you're saying?
No, he did. But you don't know.
He definitely did. Thank you guys for watching the show today. Thank you to Weiss Markets. And be sure to go to NorthcentralPa.com for all of your local news.
And tomorrow,
Yes.
You know what tomorrow is?
What's tomorrow?
February.
It is nuts. It went by fast.
Or is it really February?
I say February. I think
Well, everyone does, but there's an R in there somewhere.
Oh, there's definitely an R before.
There's a couple R's. There's more R's. There's a silent R in the middle of February.
Yeah. It's going to go. February's going to fly by.
I hope
I'm telling
so.
you right now. It already is.
You know why? Because March is
cold.
on the other end, and we got to get through this winter.
It is cold.
It's not
This is the longest. We've had more snow, and we've had more frequent snowfall. I cannot remember the last time we had like a little bit of snow on the ground, and it just never melted.
It's supposed to get to 40 this week one day. And
okay. I
think
mean, we've had the same snow on the ground for 3 weeks.
We're
now.
going to get above freezing this week, supposedly.
Okay.
I don't know when, but it's coming.
Okay. Yeah.
It's been cold.
This has been a real winter, not like a horrible winter.
I think, and not to get off on this, and we'll talk. We needed this though, didn't we? Isn't this like for ticks? You're a Lyme disease guy.
I don't know how that works. I'd have to read. I don't want to spread misinformation. I'm not sure what winter and ticks. I'm not sure how the whole thing works.
It at least hibernates them. Okay. I think warm winters is bad
for ticks.
I don't know how good cold winters are.
Yeah.
But I think warm winters are bad.
Okay.
That's what I think.
I'll believe you.
Because I probably got clickbaited into it one time, and I read an article.
I know cold winters are good for disease because it kills off weaker animals, diseased animals. They die. It ends the cycle. So I know for that reason, it's always good.
It has to be good for the ice caps because they're melting. They can't be melting now. Nothing is melting.
Greenland just did a thing today that they are stopping all speculative drilling and mining.
Really?
And that includes gas and and oil.
Wow.
Yes. Yep.
And what's funny, I don't know if you knew, Greenland is a big land of nothingness.
Well,
Iceland is a nice little place. And I'd heard the speculation
like from the Mighty Ducks.
No. Why? Is that true?
There's a scene in the Mighty Ducks where she explains it the exact same way you just explained it.
Oh, I don't know. I never watched the Mighty Ducks till like a year ago, so I probably didn't get it. But yeah, that they named Iceland because they wanted to keep people away from it. So they named it Iceland because people would think like, who wants to go to Iceland? That's what I'd heard.
That's interesting.
Whether that's misinformation or not, I don't know, but that's what I heard.
We almost missed this one. Joe says Mark is correct once again.
About what? Everything.
At some point, everything, because I'm not sure when he actually posted that one. All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm Jeff Everett. He's Mark Messina. Thanks for listening to the Midday Show.
I want to show that to my kids. Mark is right once again.